Mark Myman. I'll be the host today. Excuse me. I'm joined by Richard Rodriguez, who is a well-qualified and respected attorney in New York City. We'll be talking all about the legal aspects of investing in real estate, things that you want to do to make sure you protect yourself, talking about LLCs, contingencies, and a bunch of other important topics. So I wanted to welcome Richard for the session today. We appreciate you joining us and look forward to a great discussion. So just procedurally, before we get started, we would love to hear from you as far as where you're dialing in from and anything you want to learn from today's session that we'll want to make sure we cover in the Q&A at the end. Please definitely post that in the chat. We would love to engage with you both during and after the session. So please definitely connect with us. If you have clients or friends or colleagues or anyone who might be interested in attending, we are also doing this session for clients on Tuesdays at 6:30 Eastern and 3:30 Pacific. You can register at thebridgeloanguy.com. And for those of you joining from the Financial Planning Association today who are looking for your CE credit, we will be posting at the very end of the session today a slide that has a unique URL and code that you'll need to enter onto that webpage in order to claim your credit. So we wanted to thank the FPA for helping us promote this event. We've had a great turnout from its membership, and we really appreciate the partnership there, and look forward to getting you guys some great information and also your CE credit at the same time. And for those of you who are not following us yet on Instagram, at the Bridge Loan Guy it's a great way to connect with us and stay informed about these types of events and sessions that we'll be doing in the future. There will be more coming based on the response we've gotten from this one, which now has approaching 500 registrants. So clearly there's a demand for this. We plan to satisfy that demand and continue doing more and more of these types of sessions. So thank you so much for joining us. As far as what's coming up, so today, as we talked about, we're going to be talking with Richard about the legal aspects of investing in real estate. Next week, we'll be talking about insurance, both title, property, and casualty insurance, on how to properly insure your investment to make sure you don't run into problems. The week after that, we'll be talking with the CPA about the vast benefits from a tax perspective of owning real estate. It's one of probably the most generous portions of the tax code is for real estate investors, and we want to make sure you're ready to take advantage of that for you and your clients. And then lastly, we'll be speaking with a 1031 exchange expert about how to defer your capital gains tax when you do sell one investment property and want to turn it into another investment property or two. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite my good friend Richard to join us, and we'll get started. There we are. Hey, Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So maybe you could just give everybody a quick introduction of who you are, maybe talk a little bit about your firm and what you guys do and what your role in the process is.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Rich Rodriguez. It's my own firm. Been practicing real estate law for the past 17 years. We have a full staff here of paralegals, attorneys, specifically geared towards real estate. When I first started 17 years ago, we were doing other areas of law, but we are sticking to the bread and butter, and that's real estate law. And for those dialing in from out of state, our clients are anyone that is buying, selling any type of real property, whether it's a condo, a co-op, a townhouse, a commercial building. That's what we do, whether they're selling or buying. That's what specifically we are geared to and what we think we do, and do a great job of it.
You absolutely do. I've seen it firsthand, including active deals we have going right now. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what the role of a real estate attorney is, both in New York and also in other states that you're familiar with, where the real estate agents kind of run somewhat of the legal process. Maybe you can talk about the differences between those two.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure we have some people dialing in from out of New York, and there might be some agents on here, maybe not other professionals. So in most of the country, a real estate agent plays a larger role. They will negotiate they will actually prepare the contract and have the sellers and buyers sign, and they will order title reports. Title report, for those of you that don't know, is a report that gives us information about the property and the parties. For example, are there any outstanding liens? What can the house be used as, and so forth. In New York, a buyer is represented by an attorney, a seller is represented by an attorney. So I have represented many clients from all over the world, Japan, Europe, many from the West Coast that are coming here, whether it's investment or a move because of their job and it's their primary residence. And some of them, or a lot of them are, wow, why do I need an attorney? I bought something in California, or I bought something in Seattle, and we never used an attorney. It's all new for us. So my role is a bit different. I step in once negotiations are completed with the real estate agents. That's when I step in. So instead of a real estate agent perhaps preparing the contract, the attorneys prepare the contract in New York. They will prepare the contract, negotiate, go back and forth, and hopefully finalize the contract and get the parties to sign at that point. Thereafter, the attorneys still play a pivotal role, and they'll continue to work with the lenders such as yourself and order title and hopefully get this transaction to a closing so that we have a happy seller and a happy buyer. So Mark, in a nutshell, out of New York State, real estate agents play a more predominant role in New York. Once your negotiations are complete between the seller and buyer and real estate agents, to get it on paper, it's shifted over to the attorneys.
Right. And there are other states that kind of have somewhat of a hybrid model, or I know New Jersey's a little bit different, but also has real estate attorneys, and there are other states that have that as well. But you're right, predominantly across the country, the real estate agent plays a larger role in having clients sign, standardized documents with only slight modifications, whereas in New York, it seems like there's more. There is boilerplate language on contracts, but there's also quite a bit drawn up in the addendum to a contract that is sort of specific to each transaction or each attorney's own preference as to what that contract states. So it's good for everybody to understand the differences between the states because there are different roles. Now, in your opinion, for an investor who's buying property, regardless of where the state is, let's just say it's in a state that doesn't traditionally have an attorney, what would you see as the main benefit of engaging with an attorney as an investor as you're out there searching for properties, or maybe once you secure one? What role could the attorney play at that point if they're not negotiating the contract?
Great question. To give them the pros and cons and what can and can't happen. Two things that jump off to me are, if it's an investment property, I'm guessing you have tenants. What are the tenant laws? What are the local tenant laws? What's going on in the area as far as evictions? What can I charge? There are certain restrictions in certain communities where it might be a restriction on how much you can charge for rent, for security deposits. New York just had major changes. You can only accept 1 month of rent as a security deposit. Well, if you're out of state, what's the local law in Pennsylvania? What is it in Nevada? So your agent can take you so far, but it's always helpful to speak to a legal representative to see what else is going on in the area that might be specific to that area. Another important piece is, and I think it's the core of what we're going to be speaking about today, is how should I purchase this property? Meaning, should I purchase this as an individual, or should I put it under a corporate structure, such as a corporation, an LLC, or maybe even a trust? And again, what are my pros and cons in doing that as well? That's what I would be looking for if I was an investor, maybe even going into another state where I may know New York, but maybe I'm looking to invest in Florida, which I have done in the past. And Florida is somewhat of maybe a hybrid to no one using attorneys. I don't know what the local laws are, so I need to find out what's happening there. So those are the two things that jump off the top of my head, is how am I buying this and what structure, and what are the local laws as far as rent regulations, evictions, and so forth.
Yeah, I would agree. That's incredibly important because we do a lot of business around in different states, and there are some states that are very landlord friendly and other states that are very tenant friendly. And if you don't know those rules going in, and you go in, for example, assuming that you have a tenant, I'll give an example because I own some rental properties in California where if you have an existing annual tenant, you can only raise the rent 3% per year unless they electively choose to leave. Which if you buy a property that has low rents existing, that tenant has no reason to electively leave because then they would pay market rent somewhere else. So you have to be really careful as an investor to understand those laws and not go into it assuming that you're going to be able to get that tenant out where you just raise the rent by 50% and then scare them off and then they go somewhere else. It doesn't work that way. So understanding that local laws are incredibly important as an investor. It can make or break the whole investment for you because you might be going in on certain assumptions that things work the way that you're used to or that you think they work, only to find out it's very different. So I think that's a really critical piece for sure. And something that I've had to learn, through my own investing in different states, because one of the topics that we have talked about earlier in the series is in potentially opening your minds to having your clients invest in different cities. And maybe, for example, maybe buying a townhouse in New York City is just too much cash to bear for somebody who's just getting started out. So maybe they would invest in Atlanta or maybe Seattle or who knows, Nevada, wherever it is, but you have to know those local laws. It's really, really important. And that's where a real estate attorney can come in really handy. And I think just having an attorney as part of your extended team, maybe you can talk a little bit about that because we've talked a lot about how you have to create a team of professionals around you, whether it be real estate agents, attorneys, CPAs, 1031s. That's the whole point of this series, is bringing all those people together in one series. And maybe you can, talk about why on the real estate side, why that's so critical.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I was going to cut you off on that. Thank you for leaving me a change up there, a nice little soft pitch. That's right. You want to put yourself in a position where you have the right people around you. You have the right team so that you can prepare. You know what you're getting yourself into. I've had it so many times where a client maybe use another attorney or they purchase, and then after the fact, they're coming back and say, this is happening. What can we do? And I said, well, this is what could have been done before, and now you can't. So it's preparing yourself. And that's right. It's surrounding yourself with the accountant, the lender, a good real estate agent, and even a state that does not require an attorney, even an attorney, because this is an investment and you have to run it like a business, and it's best to prepare going into it rather than thrust yourself into it and then have some regrets. Just yesterday, I had a friend, he has a 3-family investment property and he's having trouble with one of the tenants, and he knew about it, but now he's at a point where I just want to sell it because these laws in New York are just awful. They're tenant friendly. And he's potentially looking at a year of 0 rent and trying to get this tenant out of the building. So that's a case where he knew, but imagine going into that situation where you don't know what you're getting. And how would you know from just signing a contract and negotiating with a real estate agent unless you surround yourself with the right individuals? So I think that's the key piece, is surrounding yourself with the right individuals and making sure you have a complete team.
Yeah, and also I think there's something to be said. Investors are sort of predetermined to try to keep their costs low because they want to have as much profit as they possibly can from an investment. But what you don't want to shortchange is on the team that represents you to make sure that you're actually, benefiting from their advice and making sure. So one of the comments we had from an agent who does a lot of their own investing is that they don't haggle with their attorney. They don't haggle with their contractor. They just expect that if they are paying the price that person is demanding, that they can expect a higher quality of work. And I think that's that was a great point that was made. So shifting a little bit here, when we look at how properties are held in title, a lot of investors do hold properties in an LLC. So maybe you can explain to the group why that might be important.
There's a few reasons, but the most predominant reason being liability. It all comes down to liability. Shielding yourself and protecting you. What do I mean by that? You purchased the property in an LLC, and I'll use a 3-family home as an example. It's a 3-family investment property. Being in the name of that LLC, if there is anything that comes up down the line, someone trips on your sidewalk, someone falls at a party, someone drowns in a pool, anything that may be, even with tenants, you have insurance, of course, but this is an added layer of protection. And it restricts any awards or any damages, anything that may happen strictly to this corporate entity that you may have. And in this example, I'm saying a 3-family home maybe is owned by an LLC. So it restricts any recovery to that LLC. So one thing I also like to add is what I tell clients is a common question I get is, well, I have this existing LLC, it owns ABC properties. Can I just use that one? And I give them the pros and cons. Yes, you can. But why would you want to do that? You're opening yourself up to any recoveries being towards those other properties. So what I prefer for my clients to do is, if it's a property, there's a corporate structure strictly for that property, specifically only for that property, and nothing else. So to answer your question more directly, Mark, it's liability, restricting your liability. A second one that comes to mind, maybe you don't want anyone to know who the owner of the property is. It might be a celebrity. We have celebrity clients, whether in New York, California, or anywhere else, or they may not want it known to the public that they own a particular property. I know in New York City, you can easily look up a piece of property and find out who the owner is in less than 5 minutes. So by putting the corporate entity, you're kind of shielding yourself from anyone knowing what you own. Most celebrities will do that. I've had celebrity clients, Mark, I'm sure you have as well. And they prefer to do that in a corporate structure so that it shields them from people knowing where they live, or in this case, an investment property, knowing what they own.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. Blind trusts are another way that they accomplish that, which is a common way, or other types of trusts for celebrity clients in addition to LLCs. But we've also seen it with people who, like maybe gone through a divorce and they don't necessarily want their ex to know all their business of what properties they own. We've seen it with people in law enforcement that don't want the general public to know where they live or what property they own. So there could be all sorts of reasons to protect your identity within the public records. And if you put the property in your own name, like you said, it's very easy to search those records, regardless of what location you're in, New York, California, or anywhere in between. So I think that's an important factor as well. So I can probably speak to this, but I want to get your opinion on one of the challenges when you do put a property into an LLC is that it does restrict the financing side. So some lenders allow LLC titles, some don't. I have my own opinion as to why that is, but I'd love to hear your opinion first.
Well, they don't want to chase the entity. They want the bar. You know that you're running the credit for the bar being that human being, that personal. Most companies don't have credit, so they might not be credit worthy. So they're attacking. If something were to go wrong, they want to be able to chase or go after the individual. So one of the first questions I ask when there's an investor coming to me and they tell me they want to purchase the property under a corporate structure, whether an LLC or trust, is the first question I ask, are you financing? And if the answer is yes, then I immediately say, did you speak to your lender? Because there are certain lenders out there that will allow financing under an LLC or a corp or a trust, whoever the vehicle may be. And there are a lot of them that will not. But almost all of them that do will require there to be an individual that is signing off on that note. And the main reason is that is the creditworthy person. And number two is, who are they going after? They want to go after that individual as opposed to the corporate structure itself.
Yep. Fortunately, our answers align perfectly. Is that lenders want to be able to go after whatever means they have. If a client does default on their loan, they want to be able to go after them personally and make sure that they're not hiding other assets that could have been used to pay the mortgage. So that's your answer was my answer. So that's great. Now, one tactic that we see people play a lot, because if financing is somehow restricted and the client might not be able to get the same beneficial mortgage that they would get as an individual if they were putting it in an LLC. What we've seen often is clients say, well, I'll buy it in my personal name initially, and then without telling the bank, I'll transfer it to into an LLC or some sort of other structure. And I know that people take that very lightly because sometimes people do it probably and don't get caught. But maybe you can talk about what the legal ramifications are of taking that risk if you were to do that without the lender's permission.
Great follow-up question, Mark. So at the closing, which most of you may know, or if you don't, closing is the exchange of funds for the keys. So you're the owner. And at that closing, if there's financing involved, such as we're talking about, the bank will have certain documents that need to be signed by the borrower, the purchaser. And one of those documents is called the mortgage. And within that document, every single mortgage that I've seen in 17 years has what's called a due on clause. If there is a transfer of ownership, the lender may demand the full balance be payable within 30 days. So to your example, Mark, if they try to do a transfer from an individual to an LLC a day later, 30 days later, a year later, whenever it may be, so long as there is a balance, and if the bank finds out, and there's a very good chance they will, they can demand immediate payment in full. So if you borrowed $500,000 and you think you're going to be cute and 30 days later try to transfer ownership to maybe an LLC or whatever other vehicle that you choose, that $500,000 could be due within 30 days. So it's a very, very big risk. And it's, believe it or not, a very common question that I get when determining how we're going to purchase this property.
Yeah, I think most buyers want to sort of have their cake and eat it too, where they want the terms available if it's not in an LLC, but they also want the protection of the LLC. So they try to kind of maneuver behind the scenes, but they can potentially put themselves in a really bad situation to where they would either have to refinance that loan very quickly before that loan goes into official default, or potentially transfer the title back into their personal name to remedy that situation, neither of which is really an ideal situation. Now, one of the sessions, actually our very next session, is going to be about insurance, but I wanted to get your take on it as not necessarily replacement for putting a property in an LLC, but maybe as an additional protection. What are your thoughts on having a higher amount of insurance on a property to protect you in lieu of doing the property in an LLC, or maybe in addition to, in order to protect yourself from that type of liability?
Well, I think we're talking about two different things, right? So, and it goes back to surrounding yourself with the right team members, which again, you should have a good insurance agent. So the insurance agent should provide the adequate coverage. If you know you're going into this transaction as for investment purposes, then your insurance carrier should know that, because there is a big difference from living at the property as opposed to renting the space out. And there's different coverage. So your insurance agent should know right from the get-go what type of coverage to provide for you. So another layer of have a good team around you and have good individuals around you. The LLC does not give you insurance, right? The insurance is to protect for liability. This is the LLC, or a corp or a trust, is an added layer of protection. Let's use this as an example. Someone trips on your sidewalk. It was your responsibility. In New York, sidewalks are a homeowner's responsibility. You have insurance, it covers it, but it's not adequate. It actually, the gentleman or female fell, hit their head, passed away, and now there's a large award, and the judge has awarded millions of dollars. Your insurance doesn't go that high. They're going to go after the owner of the property. They may go outside of that coverage. So now you're restricting any award or damages strictly to that legal entity, and hopefully it only owns that property, which goes back to what we were speaking about in the beginning. Is that example clear? Does that kind of answer your question, Mark? Was that where you were heading with that?
Yeah, No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because I think some people assume that it can be a full replacement for an LLC, but unless you have just absolutely excessive amounts of coverage, in all likelihood, it's those kind of doomsday situations that nobody really plans for that, you could have a problem with. And there have been those things that have happened, and that's why insurance companies exist. But I think the point here is that it's not a replacement for putting a property in an LLC, but another way to add that extra layer of protection. So that's great insight. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit to contingencies, because right now the markets in every section of the country is hot, hot, hot. And one way that buyers try to differentiate themselves is by waiving contingencies, whether it be a contingency for an inspection or for financing or an appraisal. In some states, you actually have a separate contingency for appraisal versus loan, which I never really understood because the appraisal is part of the loan, but that's a different topic for another time. But a lot of buyers will try to differentiate themselves from other buyers by waiving those contingencies. And I'm sure you've been asked a million times, like, hey, should I do this? Is this a good idea, a bad idea? So I want to get your general take on that, and then I'll ask you some specific questions about that as well.
Can I just say, oh boy, because we're in that period. I just got one this morning. So what's important to note is you have to know the market, right? You have to know where we are at. And that's one thing that I'm constantly studying is where are we? Where are my colleagues? I'm constantly asking questions to loan officers such as yourself or other attorneys that I'm friendly with or real estate agents. Where is the market? Where is it busy? Where are we heading? What does it look like? Because you're right. Right now we're in a very crazy market, and I feel like every deal that's coming across has some type of contingency, whether it's no mortgage contingency, no inspection clause. I had one this morning, just about an hour ago. There will be a mortgage contingency, but no appraisal contingency. So I think that's what you were referring to just a few minutes ago. So the way I deal with those contingencies, I make sure my clients are fully aware of the pros and cons, the do's and the don'ts, what can and can't happen here. And then I let them make the decision. Because the reality is in today's market, and this is probably across the country, if you're not waiving a mortgage contingency or bypassing on an inspection or whatever else it may be, you don't have your foot in the door. You're not getting this deal. Your offer may not even be considered. And that was one of the calls I had this morning. If I think they wanted a sale contingency. In a normal market, you may not get that. You're definitely not getting that today. And that's what I had to relay to the client. And as long as she understood why, then I'm okay. But the most important thing is informing the clients, making sure they understand so that they can make an informed decision. So how do I feel about them? It's not the best because then I cannot protect my client, but it is what it is. You have to know the market. You have to know where we are. And you have to just roll with it because otherwise, if you just put a hard no to all of the contingencies, you say, no, it's not a good idea. You don't do it. In today's market, you're not getting any deal done, period.
Yeah. And it's a difficult position to be in as a buyer because we're in a rising price environment in pretty much every market of the country right now. And that puts pressure on appraisals. So we have more situations now than when the market's not quite as hot, where appraisals are more of a concern. So if you have a client, for example, that's putting the minimum down, let's say it's 20% on a jumbo loan, for example, and we go into it sometimes knowing that property is not going to appraise because they bid it up, $50, $100, $200,000 over asking. There's nothing in the area or maybe in the building if they're buying an apartment to support that price. I had a conversation with an agent this morning. His listing price of 2.1 came in with a finance buyer at 2.3. And the whole discussion was, how are we going to manage this if the appraisal comes in low? Because there's nothing to support that 2.3 price in the last year within that building. And it's a big problem, and it's more of an issue now. And I think it's also what you also have to be mindful of. We talked about knowing the local requirements and laws. The the amount of the deposit varies significantly from one state to the next. Whereas in New York, it's a 10% deposit. It's a lot of money. If you're buying a $2 million home, that's $200,000 you have on the line that if you can't get your mortgage for some reason, you've waived the contingency, you're walking away from a sizable chunk of money. In other states, it could be just a few $1,000s. I know California is 3% standard. So there's different laws and more that you have potentially to lose if you can't get the financing. But I feel like there are ways that you can mitigate that risk to a certain extent. If you have that right team, again, we talked about how important this is, the lender, an attorney, an agent, all communicating with each other effectively to know, okay, here are the comps, this is what the comps support. If we know, for example, that a client is putting down, let's say 50%, then the appraisal contingency for them is not such a big deal, as long as they're not going to emotionally get caught up in the fact that the property might not appraise for what they're paying for it. But that's inherent in a rising price environment. You're setting new bars, so to speak, for prices, so you can't really expect that the appraisal is going to support that. Because appraisers are bound by the laws that require them to appraise properties based on what's sold in the past, not what's in contract right now or about to go into contract tomorrow. So there's an inherent flaw there with appraisals, but you can mitigate that. If your client's putting more money down, you can at least assess how risky it is. So if you're putting 50% down, the comps are close to the purchase price, but maybe a little under, you're probably fine. It's probably not as risky of a situation. If you know that the client's really stable financially, they're not going to lose their job. They've been at their job for 20 years, despite, COVID, and when other people are getting laid off, they still have their jobs, they can be a little more secure in their ability to get the financing. So I think there are things that you can kind of do to assess that risk if you have the right team around you, which can at least inform you as to how risky of an endeavor it might be to waive contingencies. But we'll sometimes get calls from clients who are putting a bare minimum down. They know the property is not going to appraise and they want to waive contingencies. It just doesn't make any sense if they don't have a backup plan for how they're going to get that cash to cover the shortfall. So we've definitely seen some challenges, but I think there are ways to mitigate the risk if you have that right team around you. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what the implications are if you waive an inspection contingency. That's the one that scares me the most as an investor, because you really don't know what you're getting into. So, but maybe we can get your legal opinion on that.
Yes. So, and again, it varies from state to state and when you are doing that inspection. For instance, in New York, an inspection is done prior to signing a contract. So once you have an accepted offer with your agents and the seller and buyer have agreed on a number, immediately goes into inspection before signing a contract, which is what I'm used to. It's the custom here and what I prefer. But for example, just across the road in New Jersey, they actually sign a contract first and then go into inspection period. So that's an important piece to know. When is your inspection period? But waiving an inspection is the scariest thing, aside from, to me, also the money, because if there is no money, there is no deal. So financing is to me equally as crucial. Why is it so important? If you waive an inspection, it's fantastic. You may have walked through the house, or nowadays there's Zoom walkthroughs, which I'm not a fan of either. And it looks great, right? That's a seller's job, is to make the house look beautiful, but you don't know those underlying defects. Does the boiler work? How's the roof look? And those are the big ticket items. Those are the ones that are really going to cost you money. So if you go ahead and waive that contingency because you just love the house, you love the rent roll, or whatever other reason that you're really in love with this for investment purposes, you don't know your underlying defects. And once you close, guess what? It's your property. You cannot go back to the seller and say, hey, you didn't tell me about the boiler, that it's pretty much on the out and it's going to cost me anywhere from 10 to 15,000. You didn't tell me the roof was 30 years old and now I have to replace the whole thing and I'm looking at another 25,000. So I think this is the theme of our hour: be informed, and how you inform, surrounding yourself with the right people and doing the legwork, the prep work prior to going in. So if you're going to waive that inspection, well, are you familiar with looking at a boiler? Are is your agent? Can you bring a contractor to just take a look with you, maybe give you a quick synopsis of what's happening here? Or maybe it is, maybe you have a ton of renovations that you plan on doing, so you really don't care that much. I had one this morning. That was another call where it's a 3-family. They're converting it to a 1-family. They don't care. They waived it. They're okay with it because they understand they're putting thousands into the building. So they're okay with what they're getting. So it's also, what's your end goal here too, is the example I just gave. Is it you're okay with the mess that you're getting because you're putting X amount of dollars into the project?
Right. And I think, and one thing we talked about in our very first session was about different types of investing, whether it be flipping, renovating and flipping, or holding long term. So I think that actually plays into how important that inspection contingency might be. Because if you're going to flip a property and do what you just described for your other client, where you're going to tear the whole place apart anyway, you don't care if there's a leak in the roof if you're going to replace it anyway. Whereas if your plan is to buy and hold, which is the type of investing that I personally do for the most part, you care about those things, because if you have to pay $20,000 to repair a roof that you weren't expecting, that's going to eat into your profit margin of whatever rent you're getting. And if you find a problem with the foundation, that can be a problem as well. I have yet to go to any open house where I saw a potential buyer crawling into the crawl space to look at the plumbing underneath the house and whatever else they need to look at under there, or checking the boiler or anything like that. So it's pretty rare that somebody would have that knowledge to go through at an open house and see all those issues. And I've had my own personal experience, which I'm very transparent on this series about. I'm sitting in my new home, which was a new build. We bought it from a builder. And I can tell you, new is not always better, because nobody's ever lived in that house to find out what the problems were. And we've found plenty of them. It all looks great on the surface, but it's all the stuff that you can't see that's usually the most expensive and painful to put money out, especially as an investor. So anyway, transferring to a little bit different topic here. So we've talked a lot about the initial purchase transaction and how the legal process is so important as an aspect of that. But the legal process doesn't really end when you acquire the property, right? You have leases, you have tenants, you have disputes with tenants, you could have disputes with neighbors. I can give some examples of my own, but before we start there, maybe you can talk about some of the more common legal disputes that you see that happen after the property is acquired.
After closing on an investment property, the probably number one issue, tenants, especially in New York. I alluded to it earlier, 3-family, problem with a tenant. And it's something I used to do. I don't do it anymore. It was handle evictions and represent landlords. I referred it to a landlord attorney for this particular investor that called me yesterday. And he was told he's looking at a year to evict the tenant. It's potentially a year. COVID plays into this, but that's the way the system works on evicting tenants here in New York. Now, if you're from another state, I know this, I practice here, this is where I live and so forth, and I have investment property. But if I were to go to, say, Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm buying investment property and the plan is to invest and have a tenant, how would I know unless I'm consulting with local counsel to find out what those rules are? What's the laws? What issues can I foresee or should I look for? So to go back and recap, I think the number one issue that I see for investors are tenants, simply just tenants, especially here in New York. I can't speak for other states. I know some states are more landlord friendly. For instance, Florida, I know you can evict tenants within 30 days. No questions asked, you're gone. But here, it's predominantly tenants, whether they're a nuisance, complaints, or just simply not paying, which not paying runs into your cash flow. Right? If this is an investment, and I said it earlier, it should be run as a business. Well, if you have a non-paying tenant, then your cash flow obviously has changed. And if you have financing and you have to pay your taxes and insurance, one tenant can break you. And it has done that. So for the past year, a lot of landlords have really suffered here in New York because of COVID, because of executive orders passed down that have pretty much restricted evictions and the collection of rents.
Yeah, those have been prevalent in other states as well. I think most states have adopted pretty tenant-friendly requirements or leniencies with collecting rent, specifically during COVID. So that's been an obviously unexpected situation for landlords, but it does put a lot of pressure on them. So as far as putting together a lease, now it's, again, different procedures in different states and cities where in some cases you may have just boilerplate leases that are okay. But in these states where, you have to be a little extra careful because the laws are maybe more tenant friendly or just understanding them, what advice would you have for putting together a somewhat, to a certain degree, foolproof type of lease?
Right. So there's standard forms of lease. If there's any investors on this call, you may have seen one, you may have signed one, or even as a tenant, you may have signed. So there's definitely standard leases out there. You can get them on numerous sites, LegalZoom, Bloomberg, is another site. That's fantastic, but you want to add to it, right? No matter what state you're in, you want to tailor it so it fits your needs and it fits the local laws. So it's great to get a standard lease, but you want to definitely add certain provisions in there. I think I said it earlier, New York just changed their laws where you can only collect 1 month security deposit. So if your rent is $2,000, you can only collect $2,000 as your security deposit. Prior to that, landlords were seeking 2, sometimes 3 months, depending on the building, the locality, and the quality of the tenant on their credit scores. You can't do that anymore. So, and again, how would you know this? Again, it goes all back to your team. Having the right people around you, whether it's an agent that may know the local laws, because they may be seeking the tenant's fee, or maybe they're putting the leases together. So it's great to put that standard form lease together, but you should always add something to it. It could be 1 extra clause. It could be 3 pages worth of clauses. Depends on what's going on and what has been agreed upon. Another example is common areas. If it's a 3-family building, there's hallways and maybe there's storage in the basement. Well, does tenant number 1 get access to the basement or not? Are they allowed to put their bike in the hallway? So little things like that come into play that you may not think of, especially if it's your first investment property. These are little things that you want to ask and things that you want to look for and make sure they're covered, because if it's not in writing, you're going to have a tough time dealing with it later on.
Yeah, and we actually just got a great question from Daniel in the Q&A, just asking if you can speak to the issues of using Airbnb to rent out properties. So that's a great question, Daniel, because that's becoming much more popular these days. Speaking as a non-attorney, and I know just as an investor, you have to be really careful because Airbnb is not legal in certain cities. Some cities have outlawed it. So I think you have to be pretty careful from that perspective. And also, and we'll actually, this is one of the talking points in our next series about insurance. There is a different insurance policy that you need if you're doing short-term rentals. So you have to be really careful, because if you're doing short-term rentals when your insurance policy doesn't cover you for that, you have a claim, that insurance company may have an out to not pay that claim. So it's definitely riskier, but yeah, it's a great question because there really is no lease in that case. So Richard, if you have any experience with any issues you've had with people who have done short-term rentals and run into problems, or maybe talk about how you might be able to mitigate that risk.
So if you're an investor, you use Airbnb to the state that you're in. Back there, did you guys catch that? Was that clear?
Yeah, you were breaking up just a little bit. If you don't mind repeating, I don't know if you're having a little bit of internet issues here or not, but it looks like you're back.
Sorry, all. I don't know what happened there. I'll start from the beginning.
That's okay. No problem.
So the first thing you want to do is, if you own a property and you're using Airbnb, first thing you want to do is check, is Airbnb allowed in this state? Second thing, you want to check for your insurance. That's everything, right? And my understanding, I don't personally use Airbnb. My understanding, Airbnb has their own insurance now. I'm not sure. I don't know what they're giving you. I'm sure it's not sufficient. It may be, I don't know. But you definitely want to speak to your insurance carrier to make sure that you are covered. Whether it's a 1-night stay, a 10-night stay, 3 months, it does not matter. You want to make sure that if someone is there, if there are any issues, whether there's injury, death, the whole place goes on fire, that you are protected. The last thing you want is to collect X amount of dollars and know that something happened and then you're not protected, because then that money means nothing to you. So in its simplest form, you want to check to make sure wherever the property is located it's legal, it's allowed. And 2 is that your insurance covers you. And I can't speak more specifically as to the insurance coverage. And that's probably a great segue for you, Mark, to make sure that everyone jumps on the next session with the insurance agent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why, again, we're talking about all these topics, because Airbnb has become much, much more popular. You can generate a lot more income from short-term rentals than you would typically get from a long-term tenant. And I can speak to that firsthand. I own 2 properties that I do short-term rentals on. They're in a vacation community up in the mountains that have done very well, but I have the proper insurance on them to make sure that if we end up with a problem, that we are covered. And that is incredibly important if you're going to do that. And also making sure it's legal, because even if you don't get caught by the local authority, but you have a tenant who causes a problem, or who, starts a fire or whatever it may be, if you don't have that proper insurance coverage, you could lose your property completely. It just wouldn't get paid on a claim. And now you've got all sorts of liability issues, potentially if it's an apartment or, that may affect other units. It can be a massive loss. So don't shortchange the cost of your insurance, even though it is significantly more expensive to insure for short-term rentals. There's a reason why. And I think from a liability perspective, just talking from my own experience, you also have multiple people that you don't know coming into these properties. So you don't know what their tendencies are. You can't do the same kind of background check that you would do on an annual tenant when you have renters coming in every couple of days. Just not feasible or cost effective. And Airbnb claims to do some version of that where they verify a phone number and an email address. I don't know what that really does for you. Any criminal could get a phone number and an email address. So I think their efforts are minimal at best. So you really have to be careful and make sure that you protect yourself if you are doing short-term rentals. I think that's a really, really critical piece here. So, we're about out of time here, Richard. So I wanted to just kind of, give a little bit of a summary as far as what do you think, 1, 2, or 3 critical items for people who are just starting to invest in real estate or just starting to form their teams? What, just tidbits of information or advice do you think you can give them for the people who are kind of just getting started, or advisors who are helping people get started, since that is the audience of today's call?
I think, in looking back and just thinking about the past hours, one is putting the right team together. Again, I said it earlier, your loan officer, your insurance agent. One we did not speak about was an accountant. Making sure that you speak to an accountant, because we spoke about getting an attorney and maybe perhaps purchasing the property under an LLC or a trust or whatever. Speak to an accountant, see what the pros and cons are. What's the best for you and your particular situation? Maybe for your situation, it might be an LLC. It might save you thousands in taxes. So an accountant. Again, just putting the right team together and making sure you do the prep work prior to getting the deal done. If you're taking on existing tenants, that you're reviewing leases, that you're making sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. Because you can definitely, no matter what the market is, you can get a deal done. You just want to be informed so that there are less surprises than you really need to have. So I think that's the most important thing is preparing and putting a good team together.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And it can really save you a lot of trouble. And one thing we've discussed during this series is that as an investor, you don't technically make your profit when you acquire the property, but you sort of set in what type of success you might have at the acquisition. If you do a poor job at acquisition because you didn't get represented by the right people or get the right advice up front, it can destroy your investment. So spend the money up front, understand what the implications are. You mentioned having a CPA and talking about how you may have some tax savings by having an LLC. That is potentially true, but it also means you have to file LLC tax returns. So there's some costs associated with that. So if you don't build that into your model of your rent versus your expenses, because you're not thinking, oh, I didn't consult with the CPA, for example, like these are things that you're going to miss. And now your profit margin gets squished and squished and squished. So I think one of the really critical takeaways from me, and this is from your session and others that we've done and others that we still have yet to do, is that having that team engaged before you acquire the property is important. Most people get the CPA afterwards when they're ready to file tax returns, or they call the attorney, after they've already agreed to waive contingencies, or, call an insurance agent like the day before they're acquiring the property, not realizing that they want to do short-term rentals, that the insurance cost is going to be, 2 to 3 times as expensive as what it would be. So having that team is so important, but consulting with them before you negotiate a deal, or knowing upfront, as you've done this more and more as an investor, because the goal is to not just have one property, but slowly build it over time and find strategies that work for you and repeat them and do them better each time. And you're not going to find necessarily, other than using every professional that I'm highlighting on this series, which every one of them is top notch, and that's why they're involved. Yourself very much included in that, Richard. But you're not every investor is going to find the best person for each role on their first try. Sometimes you have to go through people. A contractor doesn't work out, so you try somebody else on the next one and the next one. You'll get you'll get better and better and better, and then you'll have your core team that you're just rock solid with and moving forward with. But then you might buy a property in another state and you're starting over from scratch. So I think it's important, but to just have that team established for your main area where you do your investing, but consult with them before you commit to much of anything on that purchase to make sure that your numbers that you're running are accurate, that you're not missing something important that's going to throw off your cash flow if you're expecting long-term cash flow from it. So I think this has been a really, really valuable session. Richard, I thank you so much for sharing your insight with the group, and look forward to continuing to explore this topic more with you over time. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Same here. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me. It was definitely a pleasure. And if anyone has maybe a question that comes up later down the line, they can forward it to you and you can forward it to me, and I'm more than happy to answer it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Well, I'm going to put up a slide here in just a second that will have all your contact information. So if anybody has these types of issues for clients of theirs, or maybe for them individually, that they want to address, you'll know how to reach Richard. So I'm going to share my screen again just briefly to talk about, again, the next sessions that we have coming up. So next week, same time, same place, we're going to talk about that important topic of insurance, which I know is known for being a boring topic to talk about, but this is going to be interesting and really valuable to make sure that you do that right. We'll talk both about title insurance and property, casualty, liability type of insurance. The week after that is the important session with the CPA about all the tax benefits of investing in real estate. And then the final week is on the 1031 exchange. So if you've missed any sessions or you would like to participate and listen back to them, please let us know. We have actually built a page that has links to all of the recorded sessions that we've already done, as well as Zoom links to the next sessions that are coming up, so you don't have to go searching for them. So you can email us at mmteam@freedommortgage.com. If you'd like that URL, we'd be happy to share that with you. so that you don't have to go looking for them. I know some people have had some difficulty with the Zoom reminders actually getting through to their inbox. So that's why we created this. If you have clients, again, that would like to participate in this, we do have a client version of this series with the same topics, but a little bit different audience, obviously. That is Tuesdays at 6:30. It's not too late to sign up. We have all the recorded sessions that they can watch on their own time. They can participate in the live sessions, or they can just watch recorded sessions throughout if they prefer, when they have free time to do so. So today's panelist, again, Richard Rodriguez, thank you again so much for joining us. This is his information. If anybody wants to get in touch with him to ask questions, I'll offer his services to a certain degree to say I'm sure he'd be happy to answer your questions. And if you have clients that need someone who really understands this aspect, both from his own personal investing story as well as helping his clients, he's a phenomenal resource. I've known Richard for many, many years and have always really enjoyed working with him and seeing how well he protects his clients. So I hope you will reach out to him to connect. Our information is here as well. Again, you can email us, mmteam@freedommortgage.com. Instagram is a great way to stay connected. We have Facebook as well. For those of you that are joining us from the Financial Planning Association, as soon as we wrap up, please hang on for just a second. We'll put up a final slide that will have the URL and your special code to claim your CE credit. And we really appreciate all of you joining us today and look forward to seeing you next week and beyond. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day.